Good morning, friends. I've made a similar video before, but the subject is so fascinating, so intriguing that I decided to redo it. In this message today, I am presenting the most fascinating subject that has appealed to me from the various studies, from the mystery that surrounds this topic, and the complexity and understanding through investigations. So here is the subject: resurrection of Jesus Christ. He died on Good Friday. On the third day, as prophesied, he rose again, and he is a living God that our faith has belief in. And the subject today is made in a explanatory kind of a video which teaches you in notes and in study and going through a theory, and in a conclusive evidence it provides the result of the study. I made similar video in some of the messages earlier, which you may have seen, and this video is made in this format. And the study needs some sources, and the sources we have are some of the experts in this subject. One is Father Kenneth Doyle. He's an author on the Catholic News Service and in the Catholic Bishop Conference at Rome. And second is an LAPD officer. He's a cold case homicide detective who has, as an atheist, investigated this death and the claimed resurrections by the Christians. And he went into the investigation and has so thoroughly he has done all the study using all the techniques of the law enforcement agencies that he came out as a believer end of the study. And he has written also a book you can read, Cold Case Christianity. And the third is, of course, an advertising copywriter who turned into an author, Frank Morrison. He is author of this book, Who Moved the Stone? And that book was on the Faber and Faber list for many, many years and was reprinted and translated in many languages. And because of this book, many people have become Christians. So let us dive into this video today and see how it impacts us and our thinking about this subject. It has caused a lot of disbelief among many and also has won many believers. So time is short. Let's go into the message and see what you gain from it.
Today, we're cracking open one of history's most fascinating cold cases. We're talking about a 2,000-year-old mystery with a missing body, a potential cover-up at the highest levels, and literally hundreds of eyewitnesses. But here's the thing. We're going to approach this like a detective would. No blind faith, just following the evidence, one step at a time. So let's lay out the undisputed facts of the case, the things that even the most hostile sources from back then had to admit. A man, Jesus of Nazareth, was publicly executed by the Romans. His body was put in a tomb, which was then sealed shut and had guards posted. And then just a few days later, that same tomb was found completely empty. For any investigator, the question is simple. What is the most logical explanation for these facts? All right, if you're investigating a missing body, the very first thing you have to do, rule number 1, is confirm that the victim was actually dead. It sounds, super obvious, but it's the bedrock of the entire case. If the person was never really dead to begin with, well, then there's no mystery to solve, is there? And that brings up the first major alternative theory we have to put to the test, what's called the swoon theory. The basic idea is that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. He just passed out from the pain and the shock, was mistaken for dead, and then, woke up later in the cool, damp air of the tomb. So how do we investigate that? Well, we look for the forensic signs of death. Now, you got to remember, while most of us today are pretty removed from death, people in the first century, they weren't. They prepared their own family members for burial. As cold case detective J. Warner Wallace points out, they would have been very, very familiar with the signs of death, what modern investigators call the mortis triad. So let's quickly break this down. First up is algor mortis. Without a heart-pumping warm blood, the body cools down fast. It would have felt cold to the touch. Then you've got rigor mortis, where the body becomes hard and stiff, nothing like an unconscious person who is still limp. And finally, livor mortis. See, once the heart stops, gravity takes over and pulls the blood down to the lowest points. For a crucified victim, their hands and feet would be dark and discolored. These are unmistakable signs that anyone handling the body would have noticed immediately. But the eyewitness accounts give us something even more specific, what Wallace calls hidden science. An eyewitness named John, who was just a fisherman, wrote that when a Roman soldier thrust a spear into Jesus' side to confirm the death, blood and water flowed out. Now, for centuries, people just read that and thought it was symbolic. John himself would have had no clue what he was actually seeing from a medical standpoint. But today we know exactly what he was describing. It's a condition called pleural effusion. It's a watery fluid that builds up around the lungs when someone dies from cardiac arrest, especially if they die in an upright position. When the spear pierced that sac of fluid, the separated red blood cells and the clear fluid would pour out, looking just like blood and water. It's modern medicine confirming what an ancient fisherman simply reported seeing. And this quote from Detective Wallace really nails it. Between the obvious signs of the mortis triad and this incredible unintentional medical detail, the sources argue that the swoon theory just doesn't hold up. The man was dead. Okay, so death confirmed. That means our investigation now moves to the crime scene. We have a confirmed dead body that has vanished from what was supposed to be a secure location. Let's take a closer look at that tomb. According to the accounts, the religious authorities were paranoid that Jesus' followers would try to steal the body and claim he'd come back to life. So they went straight to the Roman governor, Pilate, and got permission to put the tomb on lockdown. And we're not just talking about rolling a big rock in front of the door. No, they put a Roman seal on it. Breaking that was a direct crime against the empire, and they stationed a unit of trained Roman guards to watch the site around the clock. So this really leaves us with two competing explanations. On the one hand, you have the claim of the followers that Jesus was supernaturally raised from the dead. And on the other, you have the official story that the authorities started spreading, what we call the stolen body hypothesis, that the disciples just snuck in while the guards were sleeping and took the body. Now, the sources we have point out some pretty big problems with that stolen body theory. First off, the account in Matthew says the guards were paid a large sum of money to spread that exact story. Kind of suspicious, right? Second, the disciples weren't exactly a SEAL team. They were fishermen and tax collectors who were scared for their lives, hiding in a locked room. And third, and this is the big one, the authorities just had to do one thing to stop this new movement in its tracks: produce the body. Parading the corpse of Jesus through the streets of Jerusalem would have been game over. They never did. And finally, for a Roman guard, falling asleep on duty was not a minor offense. It was punishable by death. That's a huge risk for a quick nap. So we have a confirmed death, and we have an empty tomb. That brings us to the third and maybe the most critical piece of evidence in any investigation: the eyewitnesses. What did people actually claim to have seen in the days and weeks that followed? And the numbers here? Well, they're just staggering. The sources, including a letter from the Apostle Paul, claim that over 500 individual people saw Jesus alive and well after he was crucified and buried. 500. But it's the context that makes this so powerful. See, Paul isn't just throwing out a random number in a fairy tale. He writes this in a public letter and then says that most of those 500 people are still alive. He was basically challenging his critics, saying, "You don't believe me? Fine, go talk to them yourselves. They're still around." That's not how you write a myth. That's how you cite your sources for a hostile audience. Now, a skeptic might say, well, maybe it was just mass hallucination. But the variety of appearances described in the sources makes that a really tough explanation. He appeared to individuals like Mary Magdalene alone in the garden. He appeared to small groups, like two guys walking on a road. He appeared to larger groups in locked rooms. The sightings were both inside and outside. And of course, there was that one appearance to a crowd of over 500 people at the same time. It's one thing to explain away one event, but it's a whole lot harder to explain this range of encounters with a single theory. But you know, maybe the most compelling evidence isn't just the number of people who saw something. It's the profound, undeniable change in their behavior. What they claimed to have seen didn't just, interest them. It totally remade them from the inside out. Just look at this transformation. Before this event, the disciples are absolutely broken men. They're hiding behind locked doors, terrified they'll be next. After this event, they walk out into the very city where their leader was just executed and start boldly proclaiming that he's alive. And this wasn't some short-lived high. 10 of the remaining 11 apostles went to their graves. We're talking being crucified, stoned, speared, without a single one of them ever saying, okay, we made it all up. Think about it. People will die for something they believe is true. But how many people will willingly and brutally die for something they know is a lie? As one of our sources puts it, that is just too high a price to pay for a story you invented. Their willingness to die doesn't prove their claim is true, no, but it proves they genuinely believed it was true. So, where does all this leave our investigation? We've looked at the death, we've examined the crime scene, the empty tomb, and we've listened to the eyewitness testimony. Let's step back and look at the whole evidence trail, just like a jury would. So let's just recap the key pillars of the case. We have a confirmed death, supported by forensic evidence that's surprisingly modern. We have an empty, heavily guarded tomb where the official counter story has some pretty serious holes. And we have hundreds of eyewitnesses whose transformed lives and willingness to die for their claim speaks volumes about how convinced they were. And the conclusion presented in our source material, especially from investigators who've looked at this, is that you don't actually have to throw out your brain to consider this. They argue that when you weigh the entire body of evidence, the resurrection actually becomes the theory that best fits all the known facts. It's not presented as a blind leap of faith, but as a reasonable inference drawn from the evidence on the table. And that really leaves us with a central challenge of this ancient cold case. See, any competing theory has to account for all the evidence, not just pick and choose. So if it wasn't a resurrection, what single theory out there can successfully explain the confirmed forensic death, the guarded and empty tomb, and the sudden, radical, world-changing transformation of hundreds of eyewitnesses? That is the question the evidence leaves us with.
Well, thank you for watching. If you have come so far, thank you. And I hope this study has been an eye-opener for you. If yes, please like the video. And if it raises some questions, doubts, or any arguments, you are welcome and free to post it in the column below. And I would be happy to respond to each one of your doubts and queries. And for similar and easy to understand videos on the Christian faith, please do subscribe to my channel Solid Rock India and share it with others. Have a blessed day.